Hey, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you may be tuning in. We are thrilled to have you in today for this very special episode of our Coded live streaming. Today, we're going to be talking all about React server components, which I am actually incredibly grateful to have an expert here with me, my good friend Kiril, because I have had to dabble a little bit with React server components, but I've never actually built anything in production with them. So I'm ready for the down low. Are you excited? Oh, real quick, why don't you go ahead and give us a quick introduction?
Oh, thank you. I go by Kiko because Kiril is a little bit hard to pronounce. So I will be Kiko and I'm working on KendoUI. For those of you who do not know, we are building UI components for any framework that you can imagine. And when React Server components, came out, so there was something for us. So now I'm digging in this direction.
Yeah, you've been working on this for a while, right? You were a pretty early adopter on the React server components
Yeah,
situation.
Yeah,
Like,
I would say a year so far
yeah.
has been. I've been paying attention, like the commits in the React repository started coming in, and obviously the React team had a code name for it. I believe it's Flight. They're
Hmm.
really creative with their code names. So when I see such commits, I'm started to get interested in, and I believe this is when I first interacted with server components, or at least heard about server components. And I have been working on a daily basis with them for about 6 months for now. So yeah.
So, for folks that maybe aren't primarily React developers or just haven't had time to dive into this themselves, do you think you could give us a high level overview of what a server component is? What makes it different than kind of a standard React component?
Oh, okay. Maybe a wild take, but it's totally different. There have little common between a client component and the server components. And what excited me the most is that React is taking like the opposite direction. Components, when talking about server components, there is nothing special about server components. The new default, we expect it
Mhm.
to be a server component. So uh, the client components would be the different kit in the block to say. But
Interesting.
yeah, so server components do not have access to any browser APIs. They have access to the environment that they are being executed in. And hmm, how to say it? It's not what they are, but rather what they enable to do with them. Say
So,
so, you can have a server component rendered entirely to HTML. So you could be building an application, and if you do not need any interactivity to say, you have a basic blog post. This is the major example that you will be giving with a blog post. You do
mhm.
not need much interactivity apart from maybe an input for a sign up for my newsletter or something, or a button here or there and a link. So what server components enable you is to develop this thing with uh, JSX to say, with regular React components. And if you do not need any interactivity, you can ship only HTML. So this
Okay.
is what it enables. So you might not need the hydration thing, which is a
Mhm.
little bit of a performance hit. It interacts with specific web vitals. So this is one of the things that they enable, but I believe it's still early in the community for us to discover what exactly to do with them.
Yeah, that's something that I've noticed a lot. Folks seem really excited about them kind of hypothetically, but we haven't really figured out exactly what to do with them. We haven't quite seen this building of best practices. There's not anything really about them yet in the official React docs. So we're still kind of feeling our way out like wild, wild west with these server components. So for folks that are adopting them in production, they're still just kind of figuring it out themselves, right? They're kind of winging it a little bit. Is that accurate or
Yeah, I would say it's a perceived feeling about the community, but
Mhm.
I believe on a white paper level, they sound really great. on theory, and it's up to us to find the exact use cases that we can benefit, because it's not a specific feature like you can this single exact thing, but it's rather uh, you can utilize them according to your specific application use cases. So this is even more exciting for me, so I can you know that for every framework they have those design patterns, the big fat.
Mhm.
Yeah, there is no design patterns for server components still, so this excites me a little bit. Yeah,
And
you get
I love that you
the good
find that
bit. Yeah,
exciting. I would find that so intimidating. That would make me so nervous.
yeah, but with the regular React, we haven't seen a major version since what hooks got introduced. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Right, because 18 was not a huge
18 is
update.
at least 2 years old,
Right,
and
so that's been
hooks.
a couple years and it wasn't like a big change. Yeah, I think you're right, like, hooks was probably the biggest change to, like, the functionality of how we wrote React, because that allowed us to really make that jump into, like, functional components and stuff rather than anyway,
Yeah, and
but
hooks came in a minor release, so it was 16 dot something. So it was
okay.
not. Yeah,
You have a better memory than I do. I was trying to think of what version of React had hooks, and I was not
it's
coming up
uh,
with it.
it's pain from suffering and with managing the different React versions and how to communicate this with our clients and where should we can we use hooks now? Because
Right.
as a UI as a UI developer, you're not really using the cutting edge, the latest and greatest because not all of your clients have migrated yet. But
It's
yeah,
true.
this is another story.
No, actually, I think that's I'm gonna talk about it for just, like, a little bit longer. I know that's
Okay,
not our focus today,
yeah.
not hooks, but actually, I think it's interesting the way you talked about, right, like, when you're making a library, you're not necessarily getting to build with the latest and greatest all the time. You're kinda trying to meet the people that are using it where they are and make sure that they have the tools that they need. And so there's a lot taking into account about what people are using, what they can be using, which makes it to me a little bit kind of pleasantly surprising that we got to play with something as new and as experimental as React server components. So what was kind of the thought process behind that, behind deciding to integrate this new tech really before it's even fully into the stable version of React, right? Like
Yeah, from my experience, they are stable. Like there's not even minor bugs. It's up to the frameworks, and here I'm putting the separation. React is not a framework; it's a
yeah.
library. So yeah, yeah let's put this to aside. It's in the face of Next.js that is the frameworks, and 99% of the bugs are coming from the actual framework implementation. So there is little to no uh, additional code. Not to say little, but it's not the major code base is not in React
Mhm.
to implement the server components. I do not expect a lot of bugs to be coming from the core of the React, and we actually have a growing list of applications that we have discovered to be using server components in production today. And
Really?
there, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, there is nothing
Huh,
worrying if they are first. The most important thing they are opt-in, so you can have your entire application as a regular React application, but then for a single page, if again your framework allows it, for a single page you can experiment. Oh, maybe I have a use case for
that's
server
cool.
components here. Yeah, so that's opt-in, and you can try it out. And if it's working, in the end, everything is HTML and JavaScript. So if it's working, why not? So there is nothing safer than a static HTML to host on your website. There is,
That's
yeah.
true. So that's a good point though, that if people are kind of still feeling it out, they're not sure if that's something they could use yet, they can try it on like just one new feature that they're building, right? They don't necessarily have to go back and like rework an entire
No,
legacy application to give this a shot, right?
no, no, no. I believe this will be thi- this is wrong on so many levels. So I would advise against that, not only with server components, but any technology. But I understand why people are skeptic for new things. I believe it was the same when Tailwind came out. It was really
Yeah.
different. And a lot of people started asking, should I rewrite my Bootstrap application with Tailwind? No, obviously no. But if you're starting a new project, if you see the benefit in this, or if your team started to, or you have a new hire who bring this technology with him and want to spread it in the company. Why not? Just try it out. In the end, it's our responsibility as a community to try out new things and always push the limit and yeah, explore what is the future of web development. I like this headline.
Right? That's the cool part of our job. The part where we get
Yeah,
to maintain legacy applications is not the part that anyone's excited about.
nah,
But no, I think that's a really good, like, well-balanced answer because I think a lot of folks do get into that, like, all or nothing mentality where it's like, "Oh, I'm so far behind. I need to refactor this whole app. I need to rewrite this. We need to move everything over to be doing this new late thing." And while that's interesting hypothetically, it's just not very realistic when you're talking
yeah,
about maintaining an application in production. So the ability to kind of dip your toe in and like play with this a little bit and see if it works, see if it makes sense, get everyone trained up, and not necessarily be rewriting the entire app makes a lot of sense to me.
yeah. If
So
it's not broken, do not fix it. Yeah,
100%. So you mentioned earlier, I'm going to jump back a little bit. You were like calling out specifically, right? React library, not a framework. But right now, React Server Components is pretty dependent on being used with a framework, correct?
yeah, yeah.
And at least the last time I looked, that was pretty much just Next.js, right? That had it kind of ready to go. Or are there other frameworks that you've seen that are supporting server components at this point?
Yeah, there are some, but I first want to extend a little bit of the importance of the role that frameworks are playing in each major programming language. So
Mhm.
I went back in the history lane to explore uh, what were the obviously, Next.js is currently a nice pair for React and the JavaScript language in general. So looking way back, we had Rails for Ruby, we had Laravel for PHP, we had Django and Flask for Python, and ASP.NET, the whole set of frameworks that we have for C Sharp. And obviously, it was about time to have some strong framework to come and dominate the JavaScript place. And I'm not saying dominate in a bad manner, but yeah, something to
Right,
stand
but
in the ground and
usually something
integrate.
kind of rises to the top. I get what you
Yeah,
mean.
yeah. It usually if you compare the number jQuery is still the most used thing in the web, but
There's
yeah,
I am always amazed by how many people still use jQuery. Like, that's something because we at Kendo have a jQuery library, for those of you in the audience that might not know. And when I first joined the company, I was like, "Oh, are we just, like, maintaining this as, like, a little legacy thing for the handful of customers still using it?" No,
yeah,
there's a huge amount of people that still use this library and are very happy with it and love it and are still writing incredibly functional apps in jQuery in
yeah.
2024.
Yeah. If it works, don't fix it. But coming back to frameworks that are trying to adopt this server components movement, uh, obviously we have the Next.js, the whole Vercel team that have contributed in the React package. But we are starting to see some emerging frameworks. The first one that pops in my mind is Waco, if I'm
Oh,
pronouncing this
yeah.
right.
I've seen
Yeah,
that one.
Waco. I believe the creator is Daishi on GitHub. So I would advise anyone to just pay attention, try it out if you can. It's really interesting to see everyone's in interpretation of how to implement React Server components. We have also seen Storybook. Like I
Yeah.
wouldn't say it's specifically server components integration, but rather so Storybook allows you to, and don't quote me on that. Feel free to correct me, someone from the Storybook team, but you can integrate Storybook in your existing application, being a Vite application, a Vite to say application, an XJS application, whatever. So it's more. If you're already having an XJS application with Storybook, how can we polyfill the things that are missing
Mhm.
from the server components to be showable in our client components. So another one that pops in my mind, I wouldn't say that they are calling it server component specifically, but I have seen this framework called Expo. Have you seen it?
I've heard of it. I am not as familiar with it as I am with some of the other stuff. So,
Yeah, so they are focused in the React Native space, so it can be highly
oh,
hybrid
okay.
application,
That's why I
and
was like, why have I not really heard of this? It's React Native, which I haven't messed with much. Okay,
it's
sorry,
React
carry
Native.
on.
And React Native is cool again, by the way. So shout out to React Native. But what I really reflected how they're naming things. They're calling them not server components, but rather universal server components, which is
Hmm,
a shift in my head. That well, obviously in these server components we do not have access to the browser in the
right.
browser APIs. So in theory, they should be working great with React Native because there you also do not have access to the browser and might be executing in a different environment. So these are the three top frameworks that we are currently closely paying attention on a daily basis that are moving us in a forward direction with the whole server components adoption.
Nice. And yeah, I saw a couple folks, yep, Storybook always very big. And I looked it up while we were chatting, and Storybook does have React Server component support in their latest version. So if you're using 8.0, they are fully aboard the server component train. They have a whole blog about it. Um, looks like as of like the end of last year, like the very end of last year, they rolled that out, which is pretty
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, they roll it out as an alpha and then beta
Yeah.
versions, but since 2 or 3 weeks ago, it's official. And
How is it?
actually, when we get to it, a little bit of spoiler alert, our
Mm,
only server components from Kendo can be seen in a storybook show. So we'll be
nice.
talking about this a little bit later, maybe.
I'm a huge storybook fan. For folks that I haven't talked about this before I was at this job, I was building custom component libraries for companies, and so we were living and breathing storybook.
Always
So
storybook, yeah.
they're the best. I will always be their number one fan. And also, hey Fuel, welcome back. Glad to see you. I'm pretty sure he's trolling here. He always comes into my chat and makes jokes and is generally disruptive. Yeah, not a React fan. But you would know we actually talked about this fuel before you got here. We had the whole framework library conversation already. So if you joined the chat just a smidge earlier, I know you're joking with us, but we did actually talk about it and
Yeah.
you missed it. Exactly. So, as people are coming into the chat, I'm also super curious if any of you guys are using server components yet. So, I was telling folks a little bit earlier, I've played with them like in isolation, just to like experiment a little bit, see how it's all working. But I really haven't had cause to use them in an actual app. Like there's no production app where I've been like, yes, and now's a place for React server components. So I'm curious to hear from you guys if you're using them. And also, we have a little survey. Let me go grab the link real quick. So there we are. We've got a little survey here that's just asking a little bit about, do you know server components? Have you used them? Are you planning to use them? How big is your team? We're just looking to kind of get a feel from folks about whether that's something they've played with before, or whether you're like me and you just haven't had the chance to yet. No right or wrong answer. But if you got a few seconds, maybe go ahead and fill that out for us. But one of the other things I wanted to ask you about is kind of the experience of implementing server components. Again, because I haven't really had the chance. I'm curious if it was easy or if it was a little bit challenging. The lack of official documentation makes me a little nervy about using them. So, did you run into any roadblocks, and are there resources that you recommend? That was like 5 questions. Let me start with the first one.
Okay.
Was it easy or challenging?
With every new technology is definitely challenging. Like I maybe might be different, but also for the people in chat, how do you learn new types of code? Because usually
Mm.
I read the source code of other libraries, of other applications. So with server components, this part was completely missing. So there is nowhere that I can read the code and try to understand it and fork it, for example, and play around with it. So this is my way of learning, not through documentation specifically, but the lack of like any real life applications was the most crucial part, at least for me. So it was definitely challenging, but interesting. So I really enjoyed the process, and I always kind of trying to try new things out. So this is my personal trait to say. So this was a perfect task to say, but it's challenging, but it's exciting. Yeah, to wrap it up.
It's fair. We get a few responses in the chat as well.
Yeah.
With some saying feels very different, where it's just hydration errors with no information of where the error is coming from. Yeah, that would.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is
you
the
look like
major
you have
piece of
thoughts on that too.
feedback. Yeah. This is the React developer's worst nightmare when you see hydration mismatch. But where is it? No idea. Actually, with the latest version of Next.js, which should be coming in 14 point, I'm not a developer advocate for Next.js. I'm just familiar with their release schedule. But yeah, it soon they should be at least improving in a collaboration with the core React team, improving the hydration error so you can easily pinpoint the exact errors. Yeah.
Yeah, and then another seconding there. I agree. Errors with no explanation, not fun. Very true. Um, we also had I don't know how to pronounce your name. Swash? Beats me. Says they started with React a couple years ago, didn't love it. And are just kind of keeping up via article streams, videos personally to kind of see where it goes, which is fair. So,
Yeah.
but
But to get back on your questions, so I see a lot of criticism about the lack of documentation, and I get it. There should be some kind of official documentation, but my subjective opinion here is that there is nothing specific from the React team that should be coming because it's simple in theory thing that should be implemented outside of React in
mhm.
the actual frameworks. So maybe this is the documentation that is lacking, how to implement it with this exact bundler or with this exact framework. And this is stopping either framework authors or some open source guy that wants to build his own framework to try it out. There is a little bit of barrier to entry. And obviously the Vercel team is in a close relation with the React core team, so they have this advantage that they can jump in a call and ask how to do
Yeah.
this. Oh yeah, we have talked about this. These are the things that we are missing, and we are trying to be proactive and like mm, write a comment in some specific pull request that we believe would be beneficial for us for a specific feature. But yeah, this kind of communication with the community outside of Next.js is a little bit worrying, but we have our ways. Obviously, GitHub is always the source of truth. uh, we came up to be a little bit creative with our information channels. We spent a lot of time on Discord. There is amazing community over there for both Next.js and the React community in general. Obviously,
That's awesome.
the community in Reddit, even though some controversial, but yeah, you can get a lot of useful feedback on Reddit. But these are some unconventional information sources that we have reserved to.
That's fair. So most of when you were like troubleshooting or you were running into issues, what you were turning to was other communities more so than necessarily like blog posts or obviously there's not really documentation, but so you were asking other questions directly with other folks that were using it. Is that fair or not quite
Yeah,
fair?
that's fair to say. We are rediscovering the concept as a community. This is what I want to emphasize. It's yeah.
That makes sense. Hey to folks that have just joined the chat. Hey, Salt and Barnum. Hey, folks, glad you're here. We're talking about React Server Components today. For those of you that might not have seen, we posted a little gosh, survey. And the only word I could come up with there for a minute was quiz, and that was not correct. We're not quizzing you on your React server component knowledge. We just want to hear if you've used it, if you like it. Um, but yeah, I am also, this isn't what we're talking about, but I am also curious about the answer to this. So if you reply in chat, I'm curious. Let me know. but but yeah, so we talked a little bit about just kind of what server components are and the experience of kind of getting to use them and how like the perks and the drawbacks of getting to play with technology that's kind of right on the cutting edge. Um, but I don't know about you guys. I'm kind of ready to look at some code. So,
Yeah.
you think we could take a peek? I know you got a demo ready for us, and I'm gonna,
Y- Yeah. I believe we can show some code, but
yeah.
let me not spoil everything. I believe it will be an exploration of the whole thing. So this is the first thing that you recognize a server component is that it could be asynchronous.
Nice.
Like a big thing in the React as a criticism was how do we fetch data? And obviously in most of the components, 99% of the guides could be use effect, but please folks do not use effect to fetch data. Please, please ignore the message, but the, this is easy to start it, but you're shooting yourself in the foot. So use some kind of library until we are ready for a full adoption of either server components or some new API from React 19 for data fetching. But data fetching is the major thing that is that server components are improving in React. So being an asynchronous component right now, I can write so my data would be and write the fetch. Okay.
Mhm.
Obviously, GitHub Copilot gives me some suggestions, and I can say, oh, wait, and I will see the data. And let me just return to my original code. Okay, so we have a service that is returning some products. This is the Northwind database. And to add server components allow me is to have the data over here. No use state, no use effects, no nothing,
Mm.
just plain and simple. And I'll show you the component in a minute, but first let's see that we have our data. And right now this code is being executed on the server side of our application. And here maybe we should have done this earlier, but server components are not the exact same as server side rendering. So there might be confusion due to the words that are being used, but uh, there are different things that can be complementary to one another. But right now we are talking about the new thing, server components. Server-side rendering is something that is being supported, will always be supported in React without any experimental canary or next versions, okay?
So, and before we move on from that too quick, for folks that
Yeah.
might not be up to date on the difference, can you give us maybe like a super quick what's the difference between server side
Yeah,
rendering?
I believe I have a sales pitch for this exact question. So with with conventional server-side rendering, you're doing the same amount of work twice.
Mm,
So first you have your application is being rendered to HTML, at least the parts that could be rendered to HTML statically in advance. But then once you send your application to the client, the same work is happening again,
gotcha.
and this is the process of hydration. Actually, the hydration is attaching the event listeners and everything, but you're rendering everything twice,
Right.
to say. And the second part, you're just comparing if it's the same as the one that's coming from the server. With server components, you can skip the second phase entirely, or at least say only these exact components need to be revalidated on the client or should have uh, DOM events attached
Gotcha.
to it. So this is the big difference.
which probably makes
So
things way faster too, right? Sorry, you were getting ready to move on, but I was
yeah,
still
yeah,
thinking
yeah,
about this.
yeah. The faster part is coming. So you're streaming the probably streaming, but sending the same amount of HTML from the server to the client. You have your most of your application ready,
Mhm.
but then the amount of JavaScript, that's the thing that's punishing us web developers. The amount of JavaScript that is being executed in this whole hydration process is enormous, and the Google Web Vitals are like really punishing if any of your scripts is taking more than 50 milliseconds to say.
Yeah,
And yeah, this is where the performance boost is coming from, not really the perceived performance. You see your beautiful dashboard in a second. It's nothing significant, but still it's for us web developers optimizing for the lower end devices or for slower network. This is the edge cases that you want to capture.
gotcha. Sorry, I'll let you
Yeah.
actually get back to coding now.
Get back to coding. So I'm console this. This is my type of debugging. I'm console logging everything. So this is my way. But this is the data that we can fetch.
Mhm.
And once again, no use effect, no use state, nothing. Just this is the data. I want to get it, nothing more. And you can see regular Northwind database. It's not available in the browser debugger. It's only fetching on the server. And the thing that we are streaming to the browser right now is basically a grid without data. We will pass the data
Mhm.
in a second, but we are streaming the shell of our grid. So if I ask you the question, if I show you like this grid or something really advanced, what parts of it could you pre-render in advance without knowing the data? Like this is an obvious question, but
Right.
I can render this headers at the top. I do not need to show a loading indicator for the whole component.
Right, you can kinda get the
So
framework of it set up so that the user
yeah,
knows something's coming.
yeah, and in a typical application, you can render a lot of things in advance,
Yeah.
right? So your data will be somewhere in the middle in this exact dashboard or somewhere. So the first thing that we want to replicate with our approach to server components is basically saying, just show us where your data is.
Mhm.
Do not fetch it. We will fetch it for you. And what this allows us, it's not like a manual work, but the framework allows us to build really easily, is built on loading indicators in specific places. So just show us the data. So this is my data. I'm passing it to our server grid. This is the only component that we currently experimenting with. And if I refresh the page, you can see that the whole application shell is available, but the loading indicator, oh, it's really fast actually without cache. The whole loading indicator is happening here in the middle. So this is the thing that we wanted to replicate, and we will be pushing this a lot further in the future. But what we want to enable you is like having a loading indicator for a specific cell or for a specific
Mm.
value only for this row, or I can have multiple rows loading in different times. So this is the thing that we'll be using the framework to enable our clients to achieve easily. Obviously, you can replicate most of the stuff with existing client components, but then it comes to the developer experience that is enabling it. How easy would it be if I have to have multiple use effects and I would, yeah, you
Yeah.
know the pain. You know the pain. And what do we do with this array? It's a controversial topic, but oh, with React Server components and what we are building inside of the components through the framework is like
We just get to skip all that.
$1,000.
That's so nice.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, man, and that loaded so fast, we barely even had a chance to see the loading animation. Like,
yeah.
flash on the screen and was gone.
And I will probably can show a little bit of JavaScript. No, this is not a production application, but the amount of JavaScript that is traveling is
Mm.
in this exact grid probably close to zero because there is no interactive elements in this exact setup. Mm,
Right.
yeah, it should be close to zero.
But users can still interact with the data once it's been loaded, right? I mean, you can still do your filtering, sorting, grouping kind of stuff, or no?
Yeah, so I'll have to reserve to our official documentation because I have lost my demos locally. But what we are doing is enabling uh, each individual data operation to be happening through server components. For
Mm.
example, we can be having Zoom, but you can sort things on the server. And here you will notice in a production application just how fast it's happening
Yeah.
with this loading indicator. It's just in a flash. And same with filtering. It's tricky to get those things right. The filtering is Mm. in this exact scenario is something that we want interactivity. So we can be typing over here without having to wait for the server. So there is a little bit of JavaScript here,
Mhm.
but then once we are done, we want the data to go to the server and fetch it and do the filtering on the server itself. So this is a nice example of just a little bit of JavaScript so we can make the things smooth and interactive. Also, we have those pop-ups, but this is our mindset when we are approaching the whole server components things. And another thing that we came to the realization early on to say is that not everything is happening on the server. I will reserve to these specific applications when we have sorting. This will be client-side sorting. So sorting is instant, but some things could be filtered on the server. So this is what we call the hybrid data operation. So we'll be filtering the data on the server, but then we'll be applying the sorting because we already have all the data that is available. Have you seen those applications when you sort something and then you click and everything resets, the whole state is
Yeah.
absolutely reset? Yeah, it's those tricky scenarios that you need to get right to combine multiple scenarios of multiple data operations that will happen. And we have the opposite thing, sorting on the server,
Mm.
so you can be fetching a really large database, like 10,000 rows. But once I have sent them to the client, maybe I want to have a local filtering. I do not need to do another trip to the server. So this is the tricky part that we are trying to optimize for a grid component and our interpretation of how a server grid component might look like. So yeah, there's that.
So that's really nice to know that you can kind of split things. That's actually a part that I was not super clear on. My understanding, which was I think incorrect, was that if you jumped over into using server components, then you were really limited in terms of the interactive side of things, right? That then you couldn't have client interaction because you'd chosen this other method instead. But there is kind of this hybrid approach, is
Yeah,
what I was seeing there, where you can do some things on the server and some things on the client side and kind of mix and match. So it's not again like an all in or all out kind of situation. You can.
yeah. I would extend a little bit on this, and maybe I have this exact illustration.
Mhm.
I believe most of the folks that have research server components have seen this.
Right.
So this is a common illustration of how people are visualizing server components. So I will have my navigation as a server component, but then my search would be a client component.
Right.
So I we can probably push this a little bit further, and I can maybe say that I can have this button right here, a little bit of zoom. Part of a single HTML element could be rendered on the server,
Huh.
and part of it could be rendered on a client. I believe this should be legal, but still maybe we can play around with the code a little bit. I believe it's an interesting concept. It's not related to Kendo server component specifically, but it's something that we feel it's a little bit of hackish. So want to try it out?
Yeah, let's do it. Honestly.
Yeah. So let's do. I will be having a client button, and I will be having a server part of a button. So those two components would give us a single button element. So yeah, I want to emphasize of the granularity and the control, the fine grained control that you have when you want specific parts on the server and on the client. Obviously, I have a Next.js application running. As mentioned earlier, it's currently the only framework that supports it. So when we're
Yeah.
talking about server components, it will be in the Next.js context. So great. Let me create a button dot client ESX. The first thing that you see as a shift in the mindset is that now you have to explicitly say that the component is client. So by default, the component would be a server one unless you specify it. So, but yeah, let's continue with this. Oh, GitHub Copilot is especially useful today, and I will leave this for later and just return my children. And now I'll implement the server part, okay? So it will be the naming convention here is something that we came up with. It's nothing official,
Okay.
but it helps us navigate with
I
this.
was curious about that. I was gonna ask if the addition of the like whatever dot client was a generally accepted way, but that's something that you guys have picked up just on the Kendo team as a way to kind of organize, right?
Yeah. So
Makes sense.
let's see if this would work. So obviously I need to zoom in, but this is our, and now the hacky thing that I want to do is first I need React now. Oh, maybe important part is that in our server part of the button,
Mhm.
there is no mention of React anywhere.
Yeah.
So this is just JS, yeah, just freelance, no React here. But then I can say that I want to clone what I'm receiving from the server and just give me data a data attribute probably. Yep. So that will be it. Yeah. So you're seeing the server part of a button, but then if you inspect it, you can see that I'm attaching something from the client. So
Huh.
it's a single HTML element, which is a button, but then half of it, its text is coming from the server, but some other half of it is being attached on the client. So this is the fine level of granularity that you can play around it.
That
You
is
can
very cool.
compose. Yeah, this is very cool. I'm still curious if they will disallow this. I'm not sure if we are breaking, but we have definitely taken advantage of this exact thing in a multiple ways, because with our components, what we are trying to do is give you everything out of the box. Everything could be enabled and disabled at any time.
Mhm.
So when we before we knew this, everything was a client because we need some DOM event here and
Right.
some property there, and really fast everything became a client and obsoleted the whole server component thing. But then we realized that we can split for this exact element. We can have this part on the server and this part on the client, and this is what we're taking really advantage of. Please do not deprecate this. Like,
But that's
and
really
a
cool
fun
because
story.
that was
Yeah,
what you were describing, like that first part where you were like, "Oh, everything just becomes a client." That's kind of where I was with it when I was playing with it. Was like, yeah, it just feels like, it's cool in some very specific use cases, but ultimately everything was becoming a client because I wanted the interactivity. This, however,
yeah.
that now I want to go play after this. This is really cool. This changed the way that I was thinking about server components.
Yeah, and what you might see in some examples, like you have The button will be on the server,
Mhm.
but then you have some kind of icon inside to say, and this will be a client component, right?
Yeah. Mm,
But yeah, here you can execute this in a single element, which is
that's really
interesting.
nice.
But let's see. I was about to tell you a fun story because working with these experimental technologies, you never know what you can use and what you can't.
Right.
So early on, the React team introduced something that was called server context.
Mhm.
So our initial thought was let's take maximum advantage and build our whole grid with a server context. And then maybe a month later, they decided to deprecate it,
Oh.
which was a bummer because, yeah, given that you see there is no React mention here, so
Yeah.
we were importing a single thing from React, and you guessed it, we were taking maximum advantage from it. But then they deprecated it, which was a bummer,
That's
and
rough.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if they will be bringing it back, but yeah, this is the hard things that come with working with experimental technologies.
Yeah. Win some, lose some.
Yeah.
But, so how many, server components do we have now in the Kendo library?
Okay, in the Kendo library, let me get my demo back. I love it.
Sorry. Yeah, if there's something
So
else you wanted to show, that's totally fine. I didn't mean to distract you. I was just curious where we're at
no,
with, adding these new components.
so currently we have a grid component, but obviously a grid is never a grid, and I will have to reserve to our documentation again to show the most the most advanced. That would be this. So this is probably the most complex scenario that we can push our grid in. So we have sorting and filtering and paging, and some things are moving around.
Yeah.
And oh, this column is fixed, but it's happening on the client because it's dynamic and things like that.
Mhm.
So a grid is never a grid. It's combined of multiple components. For example, this is a drop-down list if you have identified it.
Right.
And this is a pop-up part of a drop-down list, like the things that had. And then you have the buttons, and then you have some icons. So a single component, but underneath there are multiple parts
Right.
that were
It's probably 5 or
required.
10 separate components. Yeah.
Yeah, and also those are the visible UI components, but early on we have identified the need to have localization and
Mm.
globalization, which is a big story and is especially strong when it comes to server-side components in general, but a little bit more on that later. So there are invisible components to say that are attributing only functionality and not specifically some visual element
Mhm.
to say. Let's check the demo. I believe it's somewhere over here. Yeah, this is my favorite one. So we have this changing of the language,
Uh-huh.
which is both tricky to do when you're working with server components and in the same way, especially beneficial. Why I'm saying that is we probably do not want to ship a whole dictionary for 5 or 4 different languages to the client.
Right.
So this is one of those things that when you say import something
Right.
and you have this I have this VS Code extension that's saying, oh, it's
I saw that.
200
I figured
kilobytes.
it was an
Yeah,
extension.
just
Now
import
it's
those.
like, "Oh, I don't wanna know. I can never add that to my project." That's knowledge that I think I should just remain ignorant of.
Yeah, let me see if I have this package. So
Ooh,
it would be
God, I'm sure it's huge, all those languages.
UDRI data. No, I do not have it
Mm,
installed, but it's those translations and locales that are really heavy when it
yeah.
comes to shipping
I'm
JavaScript.
I'm I'm
So
cracking
if
up at
we
this comment that just says multi-languages, I'm out. Like,
I'm out. Yeah, it's really tricky to get right. So these are the things that we avoid sending to the client, but still support behind a single drop-down list. Obviously, this would require a trip to the server,
yeah.
but if done right, yeah, it's the spare the client's machine, not your own servers. Server runtime is cheap, but everyone could be importing this in an old mobile phone with a slow 3G connection. So,
Oof. Yeah.
and I believe I have another use case that really fascinates me about server components, and I initially wanted to experiment this. And have you seen those highlighted code box in our documentation or in any documentation?
Yeah.
So these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Do you know exactly how heavy a library that supports this is?
I never thought about it. I gotta tell you. Yeah, no, it probably is pretty huge, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah. I believe I have a demo that where I have experimented a little bit with. So yeah, it's my blog post. Let's see.
That makes sense though, because
Oops.
you're like kind of running a whole app like within the web page, right? Especially trying to I bet that's chunky.
Yeah, let's give it a second. Should be loading really soon. Yeah, this is a starter template for a blog post,
Uh-huh.
and obviously the content is
Right.
just a paragraph and some list, and
Right. Just a
these
little
are the
markdown.
code blocks.
Mhm.
Yeah, and a usual approach to this would be if you're lucky and your framework supports this exact library, and this exact library have a plugin for it, which is a case with my favorite library. It's called Shiki. Let me find it. So this will be a shout out. Just a second here. So I have this library called Shiki from Reactjs. They have a rehype plugin. So obviously every markdown is coming down to a remark and rehype. And they have a plugin, but if you want to do this in your own, and this was my initial thought, well, I do not want any plugins in some kind of configuration, and I want to do this in a React component. How do I do this?
Mm.
So how would I do this? And I'll be having a codeblock component which is responsible for those things, and I will import the library uh, alone, and I want to just go, oops, spoiler alert over there. I want to just go to HTML. It should be as simple as that, okay? So I receive the code and I want the HTML. Without it, let me just show you the unstyled version. Can I do that? Oops, server is down. Those things happen when you're doing live coding.
All good. While that runs, we did get a question. So
Yeah,
curious to see if you get an answer. Wisdom asks, since we talked about binding data, are there any built-in caching mechanisms, or is that expected to be done by the user?
not by the user, neither by our library. It should be done by the framework. So we are giving a lot of hard time to the actual framework, but I believe it's the best place to caching. Obviously, there is a new. It's not a hook. It's an API from React,
Hmm.
which is called React Cache, if I'm not mistaken. You can correct me on that, someone in the chat. But it's supposed to make implementing data caching easier on a framework level. So there will be that. But it's definitely not our responsibility in the scope of a single component. It's not the component's responsibility to do caching, to be honest.
Right.
It would be a nice trick. We'll definitely try it out. So thanks for the question. Hmm. Coming up to our example. So what I wanted to show you earlier is this library, Shiki.
Mhm.
There's multiple libraries, Highlight.js and others not to mention, but each of them is really expensive. And
Mm.
just let me show you how much expensive is to import code highlighting library. My plugin is saying so it will be 7.5 megabytes, and that will be 1.5 megabytes gzipped. So For those of you that are not aware, this is probably free websites.
That's more than I was expecting.
Just
When you were first talking about this, I thought you were talking about, like, running the live example, and you weren't even talking you were literally just talking about the code
no, no, no,
highlighting.
no, no. The, even I believe the live example should be less.
Okay.
Let's
That's
put this to the test, okay? So okay, a whole grid. Okay, so a whole grid. We need the data. With the data will be 473 kilobytes.
the
So
whole
this is
live example is
yeah,
less
the
than what it
example
takes to highlight the code.
with the data. Yeah, with the data and with the styles would be less than just this.
That's
And this
nuts.
is not definitely not a Qbyte shaming the library. It's amazing. I love it. But still it's is the in the essence of those highlighting libraries. This is just an example. So what we can do with server components, what they allow us to do is say, hey, this is the server component. Do not send any of this JavaScript to the client.
Mhm.
So stick it there. Just send the HTML. This is the important part. So this is the final result. So I'll have those things. Let me clear it a little bit. But I'll have those tags that are okay. This would be of this color, and this string would be of this color, and this and this and this. This is the only thing that's important, right?
Right.
And obviously this goes if your code block is static. If you're building something like Code Sandbox or StackBlitz, where you type in code and should be highlighted on the spot, it's a different story. But let's face it, most of the blog posts have those static code blocks, and this is a single thing that we have experienced a lot of pain points in the past. I have been primarily responsible for implementing our documentation website, so
Mm.
this is familiar to me. And when I saw the whole concept of server components, even before trying it out, I was, yeah, maybe we can use it in this exact scenario, which is which is really refreshing to see real life examples and people reflecting. I can use it here and I can use it here, and we're sharing all these use cases. And this is how we built the story of why are server components even useful in the first place.
Makes sense. It does
Yeah.
help to see people using it for real in real world applications. Because right, you could read 1,000 tutorials, and I have. It just doesn't make it click the same way that it does when you're talking about using it for real.
Yeah, so when someone comes to me, should we be using server components? Well, are you fetching data? Yeah,
Yeah.
probably. Do you want less JavaScript? Yeah, who do not want less JavaScript?
Right.
So it's an overall more flexible architecture. This will be my sales pitch for server components.
Nope, it's a good one, honestly. You did a fair bit to convert me to the idea over the last hour.
Yeah,
I'm kinda in. We have a little survey going over here. We're just asking you, are you using server components? How big is your team? We're just curious, right? Mostly this is me. I'm just curious. I want to know who else is using these, how you're using them. So if you've got a few minutes, we would certainly appreciate it, and that helps the team, right? That helps us make components that are more useful, right? That are meeting the needs of how you guys are using them when you're building stuff for real.
this is an interesting example again with the Northwind database, a favorite one for the .NET folks. But if someone recalls, in the Northwind database, categories are referenced by ID and they are not listed by its name. So maybe a better description would be, yeah, category ID. And initially, how would you handle all of this? I would probably send a separate request for this exact thing, but then what I will be doing inside the grid, outside of the grid, how be I showing a loading indicator in some case. And this is one of my most favorite demos to say. And the final output of this should be, instead of category ID, I want the actual category name. And in the Northwind database, it's called beverages and something and drinks and whatever. And I need to separate the request. But how do I do this? So normally what I will do is have everything in advance.
Mhm.
So the code here is a little bit ugly, but I will try to explain it the best as possible. So it's a multi-conditional fetch request. So I'm taking the whole Northwind products, and then I'll get the JSON results, map it because everything is hidden behind this div field, and then I will do a consecutive request for each item again to ask for the category name based on the whatever this means. Okay, so and the interesting thing is, regardless of the how ugly the actual data request is, and pay attention to the loading indicator. I will refresh right now. So
Mhm.
it's coming in two parts. So first we have the general loading
Yep.
indicator in the middle, which is saying I'm waiting for the whole data. And then, since this is a promise, our actually, it's not our, it's the React suspense feature that is detecting is that, okay, something inside this cell is also promise.
Mhm.
So maybe I should show the loading indicator. Again, this can be achieved with a regular client components when I have a use effect and multiple states for loading things, but I do not want to do this. This is not my favorite developer experience. Yeah, and this thing we can push even further, and it will be our second demo, which I will show you in just a second.
Mhm.
Here right now, I'm just fetching the data, the initial data, but then I'm providing to our grid a custom value, which will be a dynamic value. And what is it? If my field is category ID, this is the middle one, I will need additional data, okay? So if it's not, everything is good, but if I'm category ID, I will need additional data. And again, I'm not awaiting the data. I'm just pointing my grid value, where is the data?
Mhm.
So we can take advantage of, okay, let's show loading indicator, use the framework for it, then await the data, and when the data is available, show it. And here is a little bit more fine-tuned because everything is coming whenever
Oh,
it's ready.
that's
Yeah,
very
this is
cool.
artificially slowed down. So it's not really so slow too, but it's right a really interesting visual with multiple sets of I'm loading this, then I'm needing this, and then this, and whenever something is ready. But until then, show this exact loading indicator. This is trivial to implement with server components, something that I would say is rather challenging,
Mhm.
not initially challenge. You can wrap this up in 5 minutes and have it working, but as your application is growing, as complexity is being added to your application, it's becoming more obvious and obvious that we need first-party support for things like let me fetch data in my component without having to go to struggles of Reactjs effect.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, can we see it without the slowdown? I wanna see how fast it is for
Uh, I wouldn't say it's so much faster. Maybe I should remove the whole.
We don't have to if you don't want to. It's all good.
No, no. Okay, let's try it like 0. Okay, it's still asynchronous. They're coming.
There you
Okay,
go.
it's not. But maybe I would say the important part is that, and I'll be nerding a little bit for the details here, but it's actually streaming the HTML.
Yeah.
I need this filter, and it's streaming more and more data as it's coming in. It's not like it's not waiting for some JavaScript. It's not waiting for a JSON object. It's just streaming data. If we stop it somewhere in the middle, it will be left. Okay, I have this, but I do not have this. It's perfectly okay. It's just an HTML, so you can continue working with your application.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and join the show today and walk us through all of this. This was really neat, really helpful. And I know folks in the chat appreciated it. Switch earlier had to bail a little bit earlier, but said really cool, super interesting. thanked you, which, yeah, agreed. 100% agreed. So if folks want to maybe ask you a question or follow up or just keep an eye on what you're working on, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you or follow you or just find what you're doing online?
That would be on Twitter, I would say. Oh, let's go with X. Is it X now?
Yeah, I guess it's X now. I'll never call it that either. It's just Twitter, man.
Yeah, yeah. We, the old boomers, are calling it Twitter. So hit me up on Twitter. It will be KS Bayansky. And I'm active there. Hit me up with a DM and we have to nerd about server components and everything React specific.
Awesome. All right. We'll catch you guys around later on. See ya.